Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the Indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement. This is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide. These horrors continue to have devastating political, social, psychological, economic, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. Today's event, Unheard Melodies, features Renena Gutman, a concert pianist and piano faculty member at the Longy School of Music of Bard College. During the performance, Renena will introduce and perform obscure piano music by great composers whose Jewish identity sealed their fate as musicians and human beings in the period surrounding the two world wars. This program is part of the 2021-2022 Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center and National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium entitled Incarceration, Transformation, and Paths to Liberation During the Holocaust and Beyond. It's co-sponsored by the Longy School of Music of Bard College and the Department of Music at Queensborough Community College. After the performance, please be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, to kick things off, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Mirna Lekic. Dr. Lekic is a faculty member and fellow for this year's NEH Colloquium and an assistant professor of music at Queensborough Community College. A pianist, she is active as a recitalist and chamber musician, performing a wide range of repertoire that reflects her interest in intercultural music, historical performance practice, and contemporary works. Mirna's recent publications include two critically acclaimed recordings, a debut solo titled Masks, and Eastern Currents, a disc of contemporary chamber music. And in 2018, she was honored by the CUNY Academy Henry Wasser Award for Outstanding Assistant Professors. Dr. Lekic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. The programs that we have planned for this year's NEH Colloquium examine systems of oppression and incarceration during the Holocaust and beyond, and incorporate the arts in order to explore the ways people make sense of confining and dehumanizing dynamics and practices. Through this series of events, we look at the creative means through which the structures of confinement are lived, negotiated, and resisted, and at how these structures may bring new possibilities for transformation and allow for transcendence of the temporal standby of confinement, especially in the imminent presence of death. This is where the act of making and experiencing music holds immense power, and why we're so pleased to be able to present today's lecture recital, Unheard Melodies, by the acclaimed pianist Renena Gutman. A top prize winner at the Los Angeles Liszt Competition, International Keyboard Festival in New York, and Tel Hai Masterclasses, Renena has performed with the Jerusalem Symphony, Haifa Symphony, Belgian I Fiammingi, and the Mannes College Orchestra. She tours with musicians from Marlborough, serves as the collaborative pianist for the Ravinia Festival, and is on the piano faculty, as mentioned, of the Longy School of Music of Bard College. Her performance credits include recitals at prominent venues and series across the world, including the Louvre and Grenoble museums in France, Carnegie Hall Presents, People's Symphony Concerts, Rockefeller Series, and 92nd Street Y in New York, St. Petersburg's Philharmonia in Russia, National Gallery, Phillips Collection, and Freer Gallery in Washington, D.C., as well as others in Italy, Germany, and South Africa. Today, Ms. Gutman is presenting solo piano works, including some newly discovered pieces, which follow the personal and creative transformations of several composers, men and women of different generations, whose Jewish identity sealed their fate in the period surrounding two world wars. As Laura mentioned, she will join us live after the concert to answer your questions. So now I present Unheard Melodies.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me today. I would like to first thank the Kupferberg Center for giving me this opportunity to present a program about a subject that means so much to me. Today, I would like to introduce music and poetry that were written by artists who perished in the Holocaust. Their voices are not here to be expressed, and I would like to attempt and do so for them. Their lives were extremely vivid, but also extremely short. And I'd like to honor them and remember that above all, besides being Jewish, they were all human beings. I chose to open the event with a reading by Dr. Edith Eger. Eger is a Holocaust survivor. She's 94 years old today, living on the western coast of the United States. Eger published in the last few years 2 books, The Choice and The Gift, about her life and her life's experiences. Eger was 16 when she was deported to Auschwitz with her parents and her sisters. She was a young, gifted dancer and a gymnast, and her parents were murdered in her first hours there. Here are some words by her about her experience. My first night in Auschwitz, I was forced to dance for SS officer Josef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, the man who had scrutinized the new arrivals as we came through the selection line that day and sent my mother to her death. "Dance for me," he ordered, and I stood on the cold concrete floor of the barracks, frozen with fear. Outside, the camp orchestra began to play a waltz, the Blue Danube. Remembering my mother's advice, "No one can take from you what you've put in your mind," I closed my eyes and retreated to an inner world. In my mind, I was no longer imprisoned in a death camp, cold and hungry, and raptured by loss. I was on the stage of the Budapest Opera House, dancing the role of Juliet in Tchaikovsky's ballet. From within this private refuge, I willed my arms to lift and my legs to twirl. I summoned the strength to dance for my life. Each moment in Auschwitz was hell on earth. It was also my best classroom. Subjected to loss, torture, starvation, and the constant threat of death, I discovered the tools for survival and freedom that I continue to use every day in my clinical psychology practice as well as in my own life. Auschwitz provided an opportunity to discover my inner strength and my power of choice. The foundation of freedom is the power to choose. I would like to open the musical part of the program with a short piece called A Prelude by Mario Melli. Melli was Italian, only 18 when he was deported from Firenze to Auschwitz. Melli was a young Zionist activist. He used to congregate with a group of young people around a rabbi called Cassuto in Florence, Italy. Another young man in the group was a poet, and he wrote a poem called "The Thought Crossed the Threshold of the Dead." That poem spoke to Mario Melli, and he wrote a musical commentary inspired by that. Fortunately, another young man in the group did survive and kept Mario's handwriting, and later gave the composition to the Israeli Holocaust Museum. So here is Preludio by Mario Melli, who was 18 at the time of his death. The next piece I'm going to be playing for you is the second and middle movement from the piano sonata by Gidon Klein. Klein was a Czech composer and pianist, a rising star, well respected and liked by the time he got to Theresienstadt. He died when he was only 26 years old. He was a very important figure in the ghetto, active as a performer, as a pianist, and he was also performing newly composed pieces by his peers. He wrote some really profound works later in his life while in the camp. One of them was the String Trio, and another one was the Piano Sonata. I chose the second movement from the sonata because, first of all, it's a heart-wrenching movement, somewhat of an elegy, and I find that it captures in sound so well the history of the time, the circumstances around. So the movement is very dissonant, very intense throughout, from the very first notes to the very last notes. And although it has a very clear sense of structure, like this structural arc from beginning to end, and a clear point of climax, what happens is that the intensity never wavers, and there is never a sense of resolution at the end of the movement. There is only a sense of loss of strength and a sense of resignation. You are left with a heavy heart at the end of the movement. So here is the Adagio, composed in 1943 by Gidon Klein. we've reached the part of the program about female artists. We're going to have two of them. The first one was a very young composer. Her name was Yoshima Feliciu. Yoshima was a young Polish girl, a child prodigy, a pianist and a composer. In fact, she performed a Mozart concerto as a soloist with the Warsaw Ghetto Orchestra to raving reviews. She was only 11 when she composed the compositions I will be playing for you now. Her father survived her. In fact, the family escaped from the ghetto and went into hiding. He writes that they were hiding in an annex underneath a carpet, and the carpet was underneath a piano. Interesting fact, quite symbolic. Her father describes her as somebody with lots of vitality, completely dedicated to music in spite of everything that was going on around her at the time. He describes her beautiful playing so effusively, very touching to read. And I chose three pieces by her for today: a mazurka and a nocturne, which were clearly influenced by Frédéric Chopin. And the third composition is called a Sabbatiada, probably from the word Sabbath. It's a dance with many Jewish elements. It's kind of Jewish chants in unison, Jewish dance, and quite a bit of fantasy in terms of the freedom of the form. She changes the time signature frequently. So we can only imagine what else she would have composed had she lived longer and had a chance to develop her full potential. In spite of the grim circumstances, I'm very glad that I get to introduce to you some of the poetry of Ilsa Weber. She's our next female artist on this program. Ilsa Weber was a Czech author, a poet. She was particularly known for writing children's stories. She was also a very gifted musician and wrote some songs. She used to play the guitar. And she was an extremely literate person, always au courant, always up to date with current events, with political events, with art and culture, reading contemporary magazines, listening to the radio. In fact, even she herself took pride in saying that she felt that she was one of a few who contributed so much to the Czech culture as well as to the German culture. She had great command of the German language, and during her years in Theresienstadt, she wrote some poetry and literature in German. For her, it was an act of resistance to use against her predators the language and the culture that she loved so much, and felt that as a Jew, she didn't want this contribution to be eradicated, the contribution that the Jews made to the German culture and to the Czech culture, of course. Let's see, she was a family woman. She had 2 sons, and she was married to Willie. And in 1939, she felt like she had to send her older son Hanush to Sweden eventually, and he spent the war there. Thankfully, he survived the war because of that, I guess. Her husband Willie and Tommy, her younger son, went with her to Theresienstadt. In the camp, she was working in the children's infirmary. She would comfort them, she would recite to them from her poetry, she would sing with her guitar. And when it was time, according to the Nazis, for these children to be transported to the gas chambers in Auschwitz, she did not hesitate for a minute. She stuck by them through the bitter end. Her son Tommy was with her. Her husband Willie was working as a gardener in the camp, and he hid all of the poems that she wrote then in German in the ground, in the garden shed. And fortunately, they were still there after the war. He retrieved them, and that's how I have something to read to you today from her own words. So here it is. I chose the first poem to be Musica Prohibita. I wander through Theresienstadt. A policeman's glance makes my flesh crawl. The loot I found is concealed, held tight, wrapped like an infant in a shawl. My heart beats fast, my cheeks are hot, I dread his probing eyes. If he discovers what I've got, they'll take the loot I prize. In this place we are all condemned, ashamed, despairing crowd. All instruments are contraband, no music is allowed. Want and cruelty we endure, every torment they devise. Let them try our spirits more, from the dust we shall arise. We must be strong within ourselves, lest in despair and dread we drown. Must sing until the song dissolves, these walls and our joy tears them down. Music lights up a poet's words, from our plight brings release. Even the sparest songs of birds bear moments of blessed peace. And when again we lose our nerve, drowning in despair, the boundless beauty of the world wafts resuscitating air. Music is a beatitude. It is there salvation lies. Fearlessly I tote my lute beneath the policeman's eyes. Fortunately, these poems were translated to English only a few years ago. Since Ilsa had such love for children and she was suffering from the missing of her older child who was so far away from her, I thought that the next poem is the most appropriate. It's called A Stranger's Cradle. By a strange child's cradle I linger often in evening's glow, her little fingers nestled in my hand. The wide open eyes of this unknown child look at me, eyes trusting and angelic as only a child's can be. With hardship and dreariness, I'm then overcome. I feel such love, as if she were my child. Her dear starry eyes, not yet bleak from suffering. Perhaps far away, someone loves my child. I would love to play for you now 3 dances in the style of jazz by Erwin Schulhoff. Schulhoff was 48 when he died, and by the time he died, he was already a very established, renowned composer and pianist all over Europe. His music was being performed on the grand stage. He performed a lot as a classical pianist and as a jazz pianist. He drew from a wide range of influences, from Schoenberg, from Reger, from Claude Debussy, with whom he took some lessons, from his colleague Alban Berg, and he had great love for jazz. He was exposed to ragtime music and to American jazz and incorporated that into his music, especially into his piano music. What drew me to his music is the aspect of dancing. And I found a quote by him that pertains to that. I am boundlessly fond of nightclub dancing, so much so that I have periods during which I spend whole nights dancing with one hostess or another, out of pure enjoyment of the rhythm and with my subconscious filled with sensual delight. Hereby I acquire phenomenal inspiration for my work, as my subconscious mind is incredibly earthy, even animal, as it were. So I would like to play for you now the stomp, the waltz, and the tango from his suite of jazz dances. I chose to end this program with the Israeli composer Paul Ben-Haim. Unlike the other composers, Paul Ben-Haim had a long and prolific life. He was born in Germany, Paul Frankenburger, and immigrated to Israel in the 1930s, changed his name to Paul Ben-Haim, the son of life. To me, I think of this not as just a change of identity, but a change of musical style. He went through transformation and form fusion between Western music and Eastern music. After his move to Palestine and bringing his European traditions, he was exposed to indigenous music, and he incorporated sounds of indigenous instruments like the flute and like the oud into his music, emulating string plucking, chants, melismatic tunes, and a lot of improvisation. I chose 3 pieces from a collection of 5 pieces by him. They are called the Pastoral, the Canzonetta, and the Toccata, composed in 1943, the same year when Gideon Klein composed his piano sonata in Theresienstadt. Even in these 3 pieces, I find a sense of transformation or journey. The Pastoral is very evocative, with a sense of searching, and it's very desolate. The Canzonetta, the song, sounds to me a little bit like Maurice Ravel, but Middle Eastern. And the third one, the Toccata, is very visceral, has a very exciting momentum, very rhythmic, and it ends in a very triumphant way. Paul Ben-Haim.
We're back live. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. I'd like to invite Renana to join me now for a Q&A session. We welcome your questions. Renana, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this beautiful and moving performance and for putting your heart into this project. We very much appreciate it. I wanted to begin by asking you a little bit how you came to know these pieces and what the process of putting together this program was like for you.
Okay, I would like to start by saying that there was not a particular day when I woke up and thought, oh, today I would like to look for music of composers that perished in the Holocaust. It did not work like that. And in fact, it's a little bit against my view in the subject. Ultimately, what happened was I was exposed to individual pieces here and there. Well, here and there did not occur too many times. But I recall the first time I heard a Klein piano sonata was in my teens in Europe, and somebody that became a dear colleague of mine, a pianist in the name of Hanna Shibaeva, originally from Belarus. She's not Jewish, but she has a very large variety of repertoire that she played. And it was the Gideon Klein piano sonata. That was the only time I heard it being performed in a concert. And it just struck me, the piece and the performance, and it kind of stuck in my head. And later I heard her play Schulhof Jazz Etudes. Again, this was the only time I heard it being played in a live concert. And then a colleague in New York asked me to try a new program with him. He's a violinist, David Lisker, graduate from Juilliard, and he's Jewish, and he was really interested to find out what's out there. And I guess it was contagious. I discovered that there was some terrific music by composers like Paul Haas, by Schulhoff, by Ullmann, and I started playing some chamber music repertoire and a movement from here and a movement from there. And then I thought, I wonder what else is there, because over time, again, like I said, once in a few years, I would hear a piece that would really stick in my mind, like the Schulhoff string sextet that I heard at Marlborough while I was there. And we played the Weinberg trio, and I thought this music is great. It's kind of like saying, you know, we say sometimes about a singer, oh, this is a great African-American singer, but actually they're just great singers. So what I really was looking for was this music. I would like to play it because it's good music, but I don't want to cast a cloud on it to say this is Holocaust music, because in fact, one of the major statements in this is that these people had lives that had nothing to do with the Holocaust at first, before, like especially the music like Schulhoff. This music does not portray what happened in the Holocaust in sound. So I thought it deserved to be heard just because it's good music, next to the music of Debussy and next to other contemporary composers who are more known. So that was the beginning of the journey.
Excellent. And can you tell us where you found the music? I think we have a question regarding
That's
this.
right. We have a question. So when I started thinking, well, how am I going to find music? It was, again, just a little bit from here, a little bit from there. Some scores were hard to find. They were not in print. Some scores were in print. So I found out there's a lot of literature by Schulhoff that was already published, even in his lifetime. Most of it actually in his lifetime. But then one day I was visiting Israel, and I thought, I'm going to go to the Holocaust Museum and I'm going to do my own search. And I just went to the computer and I started playing around with words and say, oh, music sheet or pieces, archives of some composers. Some of it I knew about, like scores of Ullmann that already in the last few years came to light, and again, the Gideon Klein, but I found the most obscure pieces, for example, the Mario Melli. It was a really, really tiny part of the museum. And I had to wonder if somebody ever looked for this and ever knew it was there. And the same happened to me with the Yoshima Feliciu. She died when she was 14. And even her father at first did not tell his new family. He had another family later when he immigrated to Israel. And I spoke to his granddaughter. And she told me even she didn't know that this notebook existed until fairly recently, a few years ago. But apparently at some point he gave it to the museum and it was there. And I saw the handwriting and I saw how much literature by her, and started finding out about her. And completely coincidentally, thanks to social media, her niece found me on Facebook and saw that I was playing some of her music. So some of it really, I have to wonder. I'm thinking probably the Melli has never been performed. I don't know if anybody had seen it. And now that I know about, some of the music was, for example, I have this book, Music in Theresen. So that includes a lot about pieces by composers who were in Theresienstadt, but people who were in Theresienstadt are many artists we know about. But then there was other music that was written maybe in Lithuania before the war, or during the war, or in some of the lesser known camps, or by Jews that did not even make it to the camps or didn't come to light. So I just found some random scores, some from voice and piano, and some very, very few for piano solo that I could see. But I hope I continue to go through scores and ask people, and go to maybe some Holocaust centers or Jewish centers from around the world. It doesn't have to be about the Holocaust, but I thought if I just start digging some archives, maybe I find some more jewels.
I see. No, it's one of the themes of this year's colloquium are these paths to liberation. So the act of discovering these works and performing them provides yet another way to liberate them so many years after. While the creation of these works at the time would have provided an escape of sorts, right, for the artist, now you as a performer, as somebody who discovers them and then reintroduces them and gives them new life, continues this path to liberation. So I think it fits very well in what we were trying to do with this year's series. Thank you for that.
I think you asked me about putting the repertoire together.
Yes, variety of these complex musical responses.
I think this particular program, I try to give bits and pieces, so a taste from several composers, rather than focusing on two composers and playing more of the pieces. And I think in retrospect, now that I'm hearing the program, I realize it goes kind of from darkness to the light. Schulhoff and Ben-Haim did not perish, and I thought it's very celebratory actually to finish with his music. It's kind of like saying, hey, we're still here. We're still making music. I thought the Yoshima Feliciu pieces were not, I don't cast them again as Holocaust music, but in the Sounds of Meli and definitely in the Sonata by Gideon Klein that was written maybe 2 or 3 years right before his death, or even closer to his death, then this is clearly a way to express, as I said in my words, that it really captures in sound, in this abstract language of music, what was happening all around, except that in music you get to express everything, in at least in where they were. And all together with the project, I think back to the point that this music deserves to stand on its own, apart from the title Holocaust. I tried to program it with other music of the time to give context, and again, to give it its place next to other composers who are more known. So when I played the full recital last spring, I put it together with Alban Berg, because I thought Berg was kind of a relative sonata, a cousin sonata to the Gideon Klein sonata. And then I thought to pair Feliciu with Chopin that influenced her, and then the Ben-Haim and Schulhoff. Schulhoff studied some lessons with Debussy, so I paired them with Debussy. And again, just to give it both the sonic, where it belongs in the sonic world, and also in the contemporary world at the time they lived, around composers that were more successful, that were more known.
Absolutely. We have one question, and this one is from Dr. Alai, who is my colleague, also a fellow on this year's colloquium. She writes, oftentimes in music, creators talk about the juxtaposition between sound and silence. I'm curious what role you see silence or breaks between the music play in conveying meaning behind the pieces that you perform, as it pertains to the experiences of victims and survivors.
Excellent question. And it's hard for me to speak immediately how it pertains to music that was heard today in the Holocaust, but I would say that I talk a lot about this in my teaching with my students. And also in theater, about the aspect of suspense and the way that we can savor silence in music, because the silence should be just as powerful as the notes that are written, and sometimes even more. And when you I think about moments of suspense, or even the rests in the Gideon Klein, there are very few of them, but I like to think that when you finish a note, or before the music starts, you already have to feel a scope for the entire piece. The energy with which you start existing much before you are playing the first note. And then when you play the last note before the rest, or at the end of the movement, the pause afterwards or the silence afterwards, you always have to think, what kind of energy do I want to give that silence? Yeah, in that silence, is it going to be the awkward silence? Is it going to be a yelling silence, which is louder actually than the notes you're playing? Or is it going to be like in the end of the Klein movement, some kind of a resignation, suspense rather than a rest actually? So it's, again, I cannot say specifically for the Holocaust, but I did read about Ilsa Weber a little bit more, and she speaks also of the aspect of silence, that sometimes the silence speaks more than the words themselves. And other times not, it's the opposite, it's the breaking of the silence. So it's a vast subject. It's hard to summarize in words, but I would say that it's really a powerful dramatic tool, just as powerful as the notes that are there and the words that can be there.
Yeah, I think it was it Schnabel who answered. This was a great pianist, Arthur Schnabel, who, when they asked him, about his magnificent performances, he said, the notes I handle just as well as any other pianist, but silences, that's a whole other story. So absolutely, yeah. Good. Do we have any other questions from our audience or from our co-panelists?
Hi,
Laura.
I'm sitting here very, very moved. And what I wanted to ask you is there's a melancholy to the music. And I think what I'm struck by is the way you're talking about this, not necessarily not wanting to focus this music and categorize it as just Holocaust era music. And I think that's really significant because I think sometimes when we talk about the Holocaust, it's in the past, and that tends or can sometimes influence people's ways of thinking about the music and the literature and the art that comes out. But I'm wondering, as you were playing this music and doing this research, if you felt that melancholy through the artwork and the music itself versus the history and the people that are associated with it.
Absolutely. Melancholy is a very minor word to describe all the emotions that go through, especially when you start doing more and more research. And it's interesting that I got to this project eventually, but even though I don't consider myself religious at all, and I'm not an observant person, and I don't even know, it's hard to know exactly what Jewish means to me, what being Jewish means to me. I will say that I'm a little bit obsessed with reading biographies from World War II. I think a part of me really is still trying to understand how it happened. I'm somehow, there is a place in my heart and in my brain that's always occupied with that, and always continuing to find another biography and reading about another individual story. So yes, it casts some kind of heaviness on on the daily life. I think you can't otherwise, and I think that's part of it, and it's very prevalent in this movement, for example, of Gideon Klein, because I'm thinking, especially non-musicians, but even as musicians, sometimes we like to play music which is tonal or which is consonant. It's hard to listen to music which is, from the first note to the last note, only dissonant, especially for people who are not used to it. The thing is that this is part of life, and that music is, again, I would say, if I have to say something about it in one sentence about this language, is that it's about people's lives and their view and experiences from the world, right? It's how they express what happened to them as human beings. Animals did not write it, not other species, and not God. It's human beings who wrote it. So of course, everything that they composed comes from real life or from their fantasy and conceptualization. So of course, when I hear these sounds, these very dissonant sounds, I have to give it room, because this is something that exists in the world, and it has to have room like everything else that we enjoy and savor in life, right? The happy moments, as well as the, all of the other journeys. And not accepting that and not listening to that dissonant music and not giving that room is kind of like saying, oh, I only want happiness for my life and everything else, bye-bye, and you're like, you close your eyes for part of reality. And what I find is so powerful about music, and actually I have a small quote of Schulhoff to read about it, is again, in art as well, in dancing, you can, unless you are censored, like Shostakovich, in Russia or something like that. So most of the time in music, you can be anything, you can express anything, because it's so abstract, and that's so great about it, that Gideon Klein can say, oh, it's about something completely different, it's not about what you're thinking, just to have his music heard, because nobody can say, oh, this is you're writing dark music against us, the Nazis, so don't write this kind of dissonant music, yeah.
And I think there's a heroism to it, to own the moment. And we spend a lot of time at the Kupferberg Center talking about survivors and talking about victims and what it means to survive, and often we're talking in very large terms about millions of people. And I think what you've done brilliantly is really refer this back to individual human beings, and as you said, to humanize them and not necessarily define them by the tragedy that befell them or the tragedy that they survived, but to celebrate them as a complete human being who had a life before and who had a life after. And I think that's really critical, because especially in these increasingly polarizing times where we're divorcing people from the labels that either they identify with or we put on them, I think sometimes we forget what unites us is our common humanity and our hearts and our souls. So thank you.
So if it's if we still have time, I don't know if people are staying, but there is one quote, it's very short, by Schulhoff actually, that I wanted to read. I also prepared another poem by Ilsa Weber, but I think it's more appropriate that I read the short quote. This one is actually very easy to dig and available on internet. He wrote, absolute art is revolution. It requires additional facets for development, leads to overthrow in order to open new paths, and is the most powerful in music. The idea of revolution in art has evolved for decades under whatever sun the creators live, in that for them, art is the commonality of men. This is particularly true in music, because this art form is the liveliest, and as a result reflects the revolution most strongly and deeply. The complete escape from imperialistic tonality and rhythm, the climb to an ecstatic change for the better.
Well said.
Yeah, I did not speak a lot about Schulhoff because I didn't want it to be all about talking, but he had quite a turbulent political life, and it's something to look into. He did have a lot of political upheaval that influenced his life and musical style. Today, there was only time for some things, but I really recommend listening to his music, and as well as some other composers on the program, and get to know more about the story. There was just so much as I could, speak about.
Thank you. Today. Thank you so much. Mirna, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Renana. We have some congratulations from our international audience for you. That was what was remaining in our Q&A. So we thank you so much. I would like to invite everyone to check out more of Renana's work on her website and any upcoming performances at renanagutman.com, right? And Renana will be doing a piano masterclass with some of our students here at Queensborough Community College on December 1st. So you have in the chat the link to our departmental website where you can join that event if you'd like to follow. That's also at noon on Wednesday, December 1st. Yes, we're very grateful to have been able to present this. Thank you
so much. Yes.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege. And we're very, very grateful for you spending your time. Thank you, Mirna. This has been wonderful. And thank you to everyone who came in and joined us today. We really appreciate it. We hope you stay safe and well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.